Okay, I may have figured out my technical errors. So here we go with viruses. Viruses are another type of pathogen we will talk about, so I want to give you some basic characteristics. Viruses are basically genetic material in a protein coat. And that protein coat is called a capsid. Okay, not capsule, that's bacteria, capsid. And there are generally two different main structures of bacteria. The ones over here we call naked because they are just genetic material inside this protein coat. And we'll talk about the genetic material can be DNA or RNA. So some viruses only encode RNA. You can also have double-stranded or single-stranded DNA or RNA. You can have linear or circular DNA or RNA. And some viruses have multiple segments. We don't call them chromosomes, but they can have multiple segments of their genome, like influenza has 8, or they may only have 1. The second major type of bacteria are called enveloped. And the envelope is basically a I don't know why it does that. Phospholipid bilayer. So a membrane that the virus steals from the host cell. Okay, so you've got naked viruses, you have enveloped viruses. The main thing to remember is viruses are not cells. I don't consider viruses living. Some microbiologists like to debate that, but viruses, we'll talk about in a minute, are obligate intracellular parasites, and I'll write that down in a sec. This is just to help you understand that there are multiple classes of viruses. So we classify or group viruses based on the type of genetic information they encode. So you can see double-stranded DNA, single-stranded DNA, double-stranded RNA, single-stranded RNA, single-stranded RNA that does reverse transcription, that's like HIV, and double-stranded DNA that does some weird reverse transcription. So if this stuff gets you excited, come take my virology class sometime. The key is actually called Advanced Topics in Microbiology, so sometimes it's kind of hard to find, but I'm guessing it will be offered next spring. This is just to show you also that viruses come in all shapes and sizes. So here's a bunch of naked viruses, here's enveloped viruses, and they can have different looking genomes and they can have different looking capsids. As I said, viruses are obligate intracellular parasites. That means they have to be inside a cell in order to reproduce. They're considered parasites because they will kill the cell. So this diagram shows you the basic reproductive cycle of a virus, so how a virus makes more virus. And these are the common steps. So the virus has to attach to the cell, okay, and it does it by a receptor. This is where the specificity comes in. And we'll talk about this again in a minute, but not all viruses can infect all cells, right? When you get sick with the flu, the virus is infecting your upper respiratory tract. It doesn't infect your muscles, doesn't infect your brain, doesn't infect your stomach, so it's very specific. Once a virus attaches, it has to get inside. Entry, or this slide calls it penetration. So somehow you have to get that genetic information into the cell so that you can make more virus. Uncoding is the mechanism of releasing genetic information, the genetic material, into the cell so that the virus can now start using the cellular ribosomes and different enzymes in order to make more virus parts. We go into details of lots of different strategies that viruses have. All those different classes of viruses have different strategies to do these first few steps. Then it becomes very similar. So replication is you're basically making parts of the virus. So you make more genome, you make more capsid, you make more viral proteins. What's really cool is the assembly of viruses is spontaneous and they self-assemble. So when you reach a critical mass, all the virus components start to come together. And you can actually do this in a test tube. You can take purified virus components, put them into a test tube, and they will form virus particles. Then the virus has to get out, so it has to exit. And there's two main ways that viruses exit. They do so this way by lysis. They basically burst open the cell. The cell accumulates so much virus material that the membrane bursts open. Okay. The second form is budding. Okay, and so lysis is for naked virus. Budding is for enveloped viruses. So what they're doing is as they come out of the cell, they're wrapping themselves into that cell membrane and budding out. So there's the envelope right there. Some viruses, let me see if I can change color here. Oops. No, maybe not. All right. Don't know what I'm doing. Okay. Some viruses actually integrate into your host chromosome, and the classic example is HIV. We also talked about bacteriophage that go lysogenic. They're also integrating their genetic material, and that means that it's in that cell for the life of the cell. This isn't common to very many viruses. So this is showing you virus specificity. So viruses have specific cells. So tropism is talking about the specificity. Viruses have specific tissue types they infect, and viruses have specific host types they infect. So the good thing is if your dog has a cold and he sneezes on you, you're not going to get sick because the viruses that are infecting the dogs are specific to dog cell receptors and you are not expressing those same receptors. Now there are some viruses that can infect both animals and humans, and we call those zoonotic. Right? So for instance, rabies can infect both animals and people. We think that HIV came from animals. So some viruses can have a very wide host tropism. Viruses have to get out, right? To be a pathogen, they have to find a new host. So transmission is how to go from host to host. Probably the most common is droplet transmission. This is where people sneeze, right, or cough. And so that's how we're always getting sick, is someone is coughing and sneezing those viruses into the air, and then we breathe them in. Okay. Oral transmission is if you drink something contaminated or eat something that's contaminated with a virus. So for instance, poliovirus is transmitted orally. Okay. You ingest it, it replicates in your gut. Direct inoculation. Right? So you could get something injected to you, or more commonly, insect bites. So like Zika and West Nile. So this example is, say, influenza or rhinovirus, which is the common cold. This over here would be polio, or rotavirus, which is the stomach flu. Okay. Insects, some can carry viruses. We'll talk about that a little bit. Sexual transmission, like HIV, and they're thinking maybe Zika, so bodily fluids. Placental, means from mother to child. Fetus. So there are some viruses that can cross the placental border or barrier and infect the fetus. And then direct skin contact. This would be more like human papillomavirus, which causes warts, or that could also be HPV, can be sexually transmitted, and that's why we're working on a vaccine for that. Final slide for this part of the lecture is, what are the outcomes of a virus infection? So cell destruction we've talked about, either through budding or through lysis. So that's why they're parasites, because they're going to eventually destroy the cells that they have infected. Latent infection is when it hangs out in your body forever and ever. Okay? So HIV hangs out latently by integrating into your chromosome. But more commonly, some viruses hang out as what we call an episome. So they're not inside your chromosome, but the viral genetic information is hanging out in your cells. It's replicated when your cells divide. So for instance, herpes virus. If you get cold sores, you have herpes. Nobody likes to admit that, but that's the truth. And if you have cold sores on your mouth, a lot of times they come back in the exact same spot, because what's happening is the herpes simplex virus is hanging out in those cells, and when it gets reactivated, it follows the nerve cell back, puts a nice blister looking thing on your lip, your immune system fights it off, but it's still hanging out there, and so it can get reactivated. Okay, and this is showing destruction of those epithelial cells. So whenever I get cold sores, I try to think, okay, this is really cool. This is virology happening right where I can see it. Doesn't usually make me feel better, but I try. Okay, and another outcome of virus infections is cancer, right? So some viruses, like human papillomavirus, can transform your cells and cause them to replicate out of control, which is cancer. So again, we're not going to spend a lot of time this semester talking about viruses, because there's a whole separate virology class, but they are pretty cool pathogens. All right, thanks.